Baba a question. She asked him this: how old is Adam? Baba responded with this: if I answered that the first man came on this earth 84 million years ago, what would that mean to you? But the whole explanation will make you understand how the first man evolved, and how this first evolved man has been repeatedly, millions of times, appearing not only on this earth, but on millions of earths. And so he is ageless, timeless. But this all has to be explained properly. The book that I have personally written when I had just stopped speaking, and which I wrote in 1 year, and which now lies in the bank to be touched only when I order, explains this point clearly. It is important for the world and the scientists to know, and therefore I have explained about cycles, the position of the earth for realization, the earth dying and the simultaneous evolution of another earth, not any other planet. When was the first human being evolved? When was the first realized being? Whether the chicken or the egg came first? All this has been written in detail in that book. So, when Debbie and I were living in the trust compound, occasionally I would sit with Erich during lunchtime when no one else was there for a little conversation. There was a time I was reading a book called Edward Casey's Story of Jesus, and it's just this, basically a compilation of his readings about the ancient soul who he referred to incarnating as the Son of God. Somebody asked him about, Edward Casey in the readings, about the lifespans that were stated in the Bible, hundreds of years old. And he said, yes, actually, in ancient times, they were these long lifespans. They were there. But he said it became spiritually expedient as the age quickened to have shorter periods between the cycle of birth, death, birth again. Spiritual expedient. Good explanation, I thought. I was sitting with Erich one day and mentioned that to him. And I wanted to get his reaction on the mathematics. I said, so Erich, Baba said human reincarnation, basically 8,400,000 lifetimes. If one soul could get, on an average, a cycle of reincarnation every 120 years, that is to say, from birth to death to birth again. And that would be quick because there are suicides, there are times when there are not suitable connections with potential parents, there are times, Bob explained, when an individual's karma is too disparate from the karma of the world. So they just don't take birth for maybe thousands of years. So there are great gaps. But I said, look, Erich, suppose that a soul could get this every 120 years. I said, that adds up to 1 billion years just for human reincarnation. Erich just chuckled and said, say 2 billion.
Say 2 billion?
Say 2 billion.
Okay.
It could be much more than that on average. We don't know. But the point being, obviously, it can't happen on one planet. It goes back to planetary spiritual evolution. In 1953, Baba had stated that there had been many Earths and there will be many more Earths. He said, even now another Earth is being prepared for when this one is exhausted. He said that new Earth was 3/4 completed and only 1/4 remained to be prepared. How long that takes, God knows. But that was Baba's statement also in that time, 1953. Baba used to use a term, the known avatars. Why? Because they were relevant because people followed the religions that resulted from these avatar advents. So he used to use their names in programs for his work to engage the followers of those different religions. Baba told the women on the hill once that he was the last avatar in a cycle of 24. This is not a cycle of cycles, but in a cycle of 24, he was the last avatar. Well, 24 avatars would take 25-some thousand years. It's an interesting figure because it seems to match exactly the time it takes to complete a precessional cycle. Precessional cycle is the position Earth faces in the galaxy and rotates its view around the galaxy one direction while the Earth spins one way and rolls through the years. It very slowly, gyroscopically turns 1 degree in direction every little less than 72 years. So it takes 25,700 some years for the Earth to rotate completely around the galaxy and come to the same position again. It's also, by the way, the length of time for the term of Indra. Indra is the personality who's in charge of the angels and devas in the subtle world. It's a term, Baba said, about 25,000 years. So those things match closely. Why are we saying this? Because these are just reflections of higher truths in the physical world. These reflection of some kind of a thing. The mistake science makes is that the reality is here and what's the reflection in some mythical world. No, it's coming from the other direction. Consciousness dictates the form. It's different. We know Zoroaster as being the first one. In the early years, we would ask the Mandali about these things. I, for one, asked them, when did Zoroaster live? And without hesitation, Money Marriage would say, Baba said it was 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago. Frady and Havovi are here from Bombay. I remember a story when a Parsi woman in Bombay asked Baba once, when did Zoroaster live? And he said, if I told you, you wouldn't believe me. And people who were academics would come and say, well, we heard that Zoroaster was 6,000 years ago. When I hear that, to me, it is due to what I call a Eurocentric Christian attempt, an agenda, to make sure everything gets placed into this 6,000-year package, because somebody so far back, 1,000 years after books of the Bible had been edited and reorganized, did some kind of math and concluded that the world was 6,000 years old. Of course, here in England, somebody around the turn of the 18th and 19th century concluded that geologically, the Earth was many, many millions of years old. But there was kind of a compromise. Okay, civilization, we'll say, is 6,000 years old, and they're still fighting with this problem. Anthropologists, archaeologists, still can't deal with it. Still can't deal with it. But Baba has said that civilizations have waxed and waned for ages. And in civilizations, it is the beginning of the downfall of the civilization where the arrogant human being asserts that we are at the apex of civilization, and then things start to really disintegrate, just kind of like it is now. Zoroaster was 10,000 years ago. Regarding that 6,000 years, I remember Erich once made a comment, yeah, that was the return of Zoroaster. Return of Zoroaster? Yes, like you say second coming in Christianity. What do you mean by that? Well, it means he came back and Zoroastrians recognized him then. The modern Zoroastrians come from that one, but he said, no, Zoroastrianism has gone so far beyond there, they don't have anything but a shell of the original thing. And Baba said, they don't even understand the original language of the prayers they repeat. It's so old. In 1954, Baba hinted that Ram was about 7,000 years ago. So there's a gap of 3,000 years at least between Zoroaster and Ram, which means there have to be at least 2 advents there that we don't know of. We don't know of those. Maybe Krishna didn't come immediately after Ram, so there could have been some there. If there weren't, there are thousands of years between Krishna and Buddha that there had to be avatars we don't know of. Baba enigmatically mentioned Abraham, but he made some comment about not including him, because it would not be, for some reason, that it's very enigmatic. Now, Edgar Casey said that during that time, the avatar was actually Melchizedek, who was a very, he's mentioned in the Bible a few times. And the things that are stated about him, obviously he was perfect, at least. Anyway, it seems that both of them were perfect. Who was the avatar, we don't know, but something was there. Buddha, Jesus, Muhammad, those three are closely clustered in time. It's a little anomalous according to Baba's explanation. Baba knew at the times they were, it wasn't like that. So, for those who like scientific compartmentalized thinking, it's hard to figure that. But what I think when Baba says 700 or 1400 years, it means an average. There are long cycles of time between advents and short cycles, and that would be an average. But I believe there was a great purpose behind those 3 advents being closely clustered. It is because the resulting culture and religion that came from those avatars had to interact with each other to create the environment for this age, which is most important. Those cultures result from each avatar from his work, and also, as Bob explained, one perfect mistake that every avatar makes. Michael LePage reminded me in Australia that Erich didn't like that term perfect mistake. It implies that how can he be perfect and make a mistake? So Erich liked the term perfect weakness. But I didn't care for the term perfect weakness for every advent, because sometimes, yeah, it was a weakness, but sometimes it was a specific incident. Well, okay, the weakness was there. Bob explained the particular perfect weakness of Buddha, for an example, was that because there was so much deification in the Indian culture at the time, Buddha did not want to talk about God. He wanted to talk about the path to truth. And that was the focus, and how is that accomplished? So he only went as far as nirvana, which means the dissolution of all falseness. It's the responsibility of every master. The dissolution of the falseness is the responsibility of the master. then automatically God is there. But he only explained that up to nirvana, and the result is that now we have atheist Buddhists who have kind of missed the point. In Christianity, Baba said that Christ's perfect mistake was, perfect weakness was on the cross. He said, Father, he said, Father,
Forgive them for the...
no, why have you forsaken me? Which implied that there was separation, and there wasn't. But now we see that in Christianity. It's frankly, it's a very shallow theology. They really missed the infinite nature of God, unfortunately, except for the high mystics, which most of the modern world of Christianity ignores. They have missed the point. In Islam, Muhammad, again because of this deification thing and also because they couldn't handle it, said, did not tell them that he was actually God. He was a messenger and he was getting messages from Gabriel. That's the way he explained it. And they could understand Gabriel as some guy somewhere, not Gabriel as an essential part of the higher spiritual psychic nature. I don't know how much I am good for in time. You know? Pardon?
You're fine.
Okay.
Yes, it is.
But we come to the importance of this and the whole thing was all, it's a contribution to the importance of this advent. And Baba would say he is the last, in his final declaration, he is the last avatar in a cycle of cycles. So not just the cycle also, but the cycle of cycles. So that his advent would be the most important. And once in the hallway there, somebody asked him the question, Baba said that he's the last avatar in the cycle of cycles. Erich, can you tell us what this really means? And Erich, who wasn't really, he was tired of answering these kind of questions. He says, yeah, every time he comes, he says something like that. And everybody laughed just like this. I thought, Baba gave such importance to this. More than once, many times. He reiterated the importance of this. So what does it really mean? How could we really know? Some people give up and just not think about it, but you know the way it is when you just think about him all the time. He said, your mind works, how could we possibly know such a thing? I just thought through, well, let's just look at natural science. So how could we possibly, you know, Bob has said, sometimes the world reflects activity of the divine, of the higher planes. Even look at when Bob was born. What were things that were significant when Bob was born? And look at the year 1894. The technology in the world, it was tremendous. Even the end of the 19th century, all of these things started contributing towards what we call modern civilization, so that lifespans increased. The electric motor, electric generation in the motor, for an example, there were some prototypical projects. But in 1894, the electric motor went actually into production. And this enabled the invention of motion pictures the same year. The elevator. Even the common zipper that we take for granted was invented around that time, which has saved, or could possibly calculate the time it saved humanity. And all of these things, what's happening is tedious tasks and efforts are just accomplished quickly, and our mind goes to other things. And the first is just fulfilling desires, pleasures, whatever, leisure time. But eventually, you know, the mind begins to focus on deeper things too. The most significant invention in 1894, it had been kind of prototypes also before, but in 1894, the automobile came into some type of production. It started happening. which would be eventually the medium through which our Meher Baba suffered for humanity in the machine age in America and in India. Even the term, the engine that drives the automobile is an internal combustion engine. Even that term, internal combustion, is like a spiritual metaphor in this age. And you consider the planet Earth, it had taken hundreds of millions of years to develop this stored energy we call fossil fuel that's being spent rapidly in these few centuries around Meher Baba's advent, while the population continues to increase tremendously. When Paul Brunton went there to Meher to see Baba, Baba just frankly told him, yeah, you see all this technical advancement in the world, telephones, telegraphs, mass transportation. It allows people to connect with each other very rapidly. Everyone in the world knows what's happening in other parts of the world very quickly. Bob said, this has all happened because the way is being prepared for me to give my message to the world. Of course, Brunton thought this was egomaniacal. And Baba played it because he knew that he wanted to have some spiritual powers. We won't get into that, it's another story, but stay on track here with this.
Peter, so we can also include Debbie's session. You want to
Pardon?
So we can include Debbie's session upstairs.
Okay.
Could you move to Q&A time?
Okay, let's do that then.
Yeah.
We'll just,
Good with that?
Yeah, I'm fine, no rush for
we'll
me.
just stop.
Maybe
This
5
at this
minutes
point.
or so, because I know we'll pick up and
Sure.
if people want to sit
No,
down
we'll
here
do the,
and mingle
we'll
with
talk
them.
about manifestation in another session next time,
Like food.
okay? That
So
kind of thing.
can we open
Any
up?
questions?
And people can mingle down here with Peter anyhow, but go ahead.
Okay,
This is a kind of a comment, not necessarily a question, but I'll put a question mark at the end of it. Phyllis Frederick was a great Baba lover, based in New York and Los Angeles mostly. And she claimed direct memory of some past lifetimes. And she also said that Baba had been Akhenaten in Egypt.
mhm.
And she felt that she had been one of his daughters in that time. So I'm just offering that for whatever
Yeah,
it may be worth.
Phyllis had a lot of her own experiences. Maybe they were that, don't know.
Did Bob ever comment about not?
Akhenaten? As far as I know, no. A lot of these things, Baba's purpose was not to be the answer man, although he gave tremendous amount of information more than anybody else. There are ramifications if the avatar just, he said this much, there are bad ramifications if the avatar gives too much information.
Yes.
In different ways. So he gives what is necessary, but he also doesn't give too much.
That's right, yeah.
For a few different reasons. One being that it can have a detrimental effect on the purpose of creating longing.
Right.
Long.
Creating longing.
Interesting, yeah.
Can you say full?
Yeah.
Well, at that point, if a human being is just satisfied with the answer, that's it. Okay, that's it. Let's go.
Yeah.
All right, let's watch some TV.
Yeah.
There's no pondering the deeper side of things there. The important thing is that. What am I doing here? Who am I? All of those questions that are deep, deep, indelible questions within. They shouldn't be put to sleep. Yes?
You mentioned about the right time for parents and being born.
Yes.
Could you tell us something? I'm not sure I understand too well the connections.
Pardon?
The connections as to
Yeah.
the parenthood.
Yes, of course, it's not, it's just, depends,
What does Baba say?
this is all, it's all past life connections mostly, but you see, the makeup has to be appropriate. Otherwise, the life doesn't fit. That's what it's about. In the New Age, people are fond of saying you choose your parents. Yeah, you do, but not consciously. All that choice has been done by the actions of your previous life. And when it comes time to getting that, you say, well, here's my balance sheet, and there's the prospect of the business. The two don't fit, so I can't take this position. It's like that. And of course, we're talking about impressions.
Yes.
So it's like that.
Yeah, the balance sheet's very worrying.
Yes. Yes, it is, except it's none of our business.
Absolutely.
We just talk about these things because, as I say, you know, the mind is like a ball and chain, the intellectual mind, and all of this is just meant to ease that a little bit, to make the ball and chain lighter for the heart to have to drag around.
Oh.
That's the purpose. And, you know, the nature of the mind is to feed on something, so why not give it Baba's explanations? This is it's just another way of remembering him. That's what we do. I could do like Asfandir Vasali. Let's just be quiet and meditate for 1 hour, but I don't, you know. We do that anyway. Yes, another question?
I just finished reading a book actually called Avataric Advent, so this is really kind of...
Jim May's book?
yeah, it's it's excellent there. You talk about it in more detail. At the end of that book, it alludes to the fact that there could be another Avataric Advent, and it alludes to the fact that that could potentially be in Japan. I've also heard other people talk about this. I was wondering where that...
I like Jim's work, brilliant guy, but there's a lot that he didn't expose himself to. That comment about Japan comes from a simple, misconstrued statement Baba made in 1954 at the end of the 3 Incredible Weeks, when this Japanese man, Hitaka, his name was, came. He came to see Baba, not being invited to 3 Incredible Weeks, and Baba invited him to come back for the final declaration meeting, but advised him to go on with his trip around India in the meantime. When he came back on the final declaration day, and we see him in that film of the final declaration day meeting, he asked Baba, when will you come to Japan? He said, no, not till next Advent. So some of the men who heard this said, Baba's going to be born in Japan next Advent. Baba didn't say that. He never visited. This Advent, he stopped in Japan in 2 ports for a couple hours each on his way to China in 1932. He was specific about spending time in China. Got off in Shanghai and went straight to Nanjing for 5 days before he came back. You remember a little, say 5.5 years later, one of the greatest atrocities of war took place in what is known as the Rape of Nanjing. These are all part of the avatars, avatars advent, wars, suffering, pardon me, resolution of great karmic patterns, ancient
I'm so
Carmen.
sorry, so sorry.
ancient karmic problems. Thank you. Question back there.
Hi Peter. I was just thought of a question on the spot right now. A bit in my mind a few times. It goes back to the Kremashram boys and Chota Baba and his apparent experience of the 6th plane, which Baba said when he sort of collapsed and all. that story, and then Bob, after 3 days, slowly bringing him down to normal consciousness,
Mhm.
at which he said that Chota Baba's experience would remain. He wouldn't lose that experience. Now, of course, in the 70s, when Erwin Luck went to interview him, he claims he did lose the experience. It didn't remain. He confirmed that the experience happened. I was wondering if you had any thoughts on that, because I thought that went
Baba
through
said he wouldn't lose that status.
status. Okay. So,
Abdullah Bakravan, Chota Baba,
yeah.
was one of the older boys who came to Mayor Ashram, and through Baba's advice, he eventually agreed to join Mayor Ashram on the hill, because he initially only wanted to study in Hazrat Baba School. His rapid advancement happened in 3 phases, basically, over the course of a little more than a month. The final thing was the evening of January 11th, when Baba, as he explained, raised him to the 6th grade. I don't even call him a Prem Ashram boy, because there was no Prem Ashram yet. He was like the icon. He was the example which Baba could refer the boys to. You see that? You guys behave yourself, it could be one of you there. It was like that kind of thing. He was,
Mehraji Karkari also said that was one thing that convinced him that Baba was who he said he was that he could convince this boy who was actually didn't even believe in Baba.
Mhm.
He was a strict Sunni Muslim.
Oh, yeah.
Give
Yeah,
experience easy, give somebody experience.
it was a real inner thing,
Yeah.
and it was, by his own descriptions, quite incredible.
Yeah.
You may know the story of how he lost his, you know that story of how he lost his experience?
After 3 days, Baba brought him
No,
down.
that's a different thing.
Okay, I don't know that. I
And-
hear that, yeah.
First of all, you know this year, it's fascinating, 1928.
Yeah.
It started on January 1st of that year, really.
Yeah.
It had been building up, but officially on January 1st, the experience of so many of the Mayor Ashram boys weeping,
Yeah.
it created a spectacle.
Yeah.
Very dramatic time. It's a story in itself, all the work that Baba did. In that 1 year, it was just spectacular. But what happened is, in 1929, Baba went to Iran again, and Chota Baba accompanied him. While they were in Iran, Chota Baba just had the whim to stay in Iran again, to be there. Baba didn't want him to. But he said, you may stay here if you follow 3 conditions. Keep silence, don't touch money, don't touch women. He told the story to Asfandir Basalan. He said, well, you know, time went by, I was working in my family business, but what could I do? Couldn't answer the phone. I couldn't tend cash register. I could just do some auditing, and that was it. Hardly anything. My family, they were perturbed with me. What could I do? Eventually, I just started speaking, so I could do customer relations, answer the telephone, not be dependent upon somebody taking care of me all the time. Well, one was gone. It was practical in business. At one time, there was nobody there. I had to tend the cash register, and that was the end of that thing. So now gradually said, my experience is diminishing. I had a very faithful housekeeper, took care of me for years, faithfully. I know she loved me. Her life was dedicated to me, and she had no hopes for a normal life. Eventually I gave up and I married her, and that was the end of everything. And since then a dark cloud has descended, I had no more experience.
It's very sad.
But what that means, Baba said in 1928, he explained that besides giving realization to the circle, the avatar may give realization to an additional number of persons upon which he decides. And he said, at this point, there are at least 3 more that I will give realization to. Abdullah Pakwan here is first. He's all made except for the final touch. He's made. Just the final touch is required. He will never lose that, no matter what happens. No matter what it seems, he'll never lose that. I will bring him down when I give realization to the circle, and he will do my work in Arabia. So he's going to be made perfect to do Baba's work in Arabia when the time of the manifestation happens. You may live to see it, I don't think I will. But
You'll be there.
yes.
It's really more for clarity. You know, at the beginning of your talk, you revert to a cult, something, a cult, the word cult.
A cult, yes.
Just in terms of the context in which you were talking about, I wasn't understanding. I don't know if you can give a little bit of clarity on that
Well, you know,
aspect of what you were saying.
there are persons who practice yogic or tantric exercises, who gain something, some charisma, some kind of a thing. It also, all this of course depends upon past life efforts also. And one may actually even advance spiritually by doing these things if they do it carefully, which very few do. Mostly people engage in these practices to gain powers, some personal self-satisfaction. It's a very dangerous thing. And Baba has repeatedly, in Baba's life, one of the main things he warned against was being led astray by these pseudo-masters. He had very eloquently described how they do things in his message in 1957, his warning in 1957. Through the years, he constantly warned. Adike Irani used to tell us 4 things you don't do. That's it. With Baba, it's not like you have to do so much, but at least don't do a few things. He said one, especially was relevant to the Western world, don't take drugs. Don't be promiscuous. He said, very important, don't follow other masters. Now these are even real masters. And Bob explained also the problems with trying to follow. It's not different for him in the early days. He had that connection with few of his perfect masters, and he would actually send some people there from time to time. But between them, there was a vast security net for them. When Baba himself would do it, it was a different thing. And of course, they eventually dropped their bodies, and it was the end of it. From then on, it generally didn't happen, unless he sent somebody. With his close Mandali, there was never an issue. They were so dedicated to him. They knew that everything depended upon his wish, whatever they did. They on their own would not do such a thing. It was only through his word they would do it. But it's a very insidious thing, what these other masters do. Ramakrishna had an interesting description of this. He said, coming to God, like entering a palace. And these tantrics, they were like entering the palace by crawling through the sewer.
Yeah.
Whereas the must, he's paraded through the front gate.
What was the 4th?
Yeah, Adike Irani.
And I know it wasn't and I know because of Adi, it wasn't alcohol.
No, it wasn't. In the words of Adike Irani, do not be running after name and fame and fortune. We don't have to worry about that, do we? Yes.
Just a second question, well, already question, just further clarity. There was a book that you were referring to.
Beams of the Spiritual
No,
Panorama.
no, not that one, some book that has.
God Speaks.
There's something else that's.
The book that-
Oh, Edgar Casey's Story of Jesus.
No,
Bob's
Bob's
book,
book that he
the-
wrote.
Baba's Secret Book.
Oh,
You
yes.
had 4 books
Boy.
already in this
Is
book.
that,
Baba's Secret Book.
is that out there?
Nobody knows where it is.
It's not in the bank anymore.
Jim might have it, he's got such a collection of junk, we don't know.
Come on over.
But he's not saying.
Treasure, if he has that.
Nobody knows where it is. Somebody does,
It's not
not
infinite,
us.
and it's not infinite intelligence.
They're not, no, it's not. Infinite Intelligence
It's not
is
the book.
a compilation of discourses Baba gave during the period he was writing. A short period from the time he began silence to the end of 1926.
And it was written primarily in in that, whatever they call that, in the table room.
Not only
The
though.
Baba's Secret Book was written in 4 places.
Yeah.
He began writing it 3 days after he began silence in the Jopti. Then the table house came there to take, it was a practical reason. The table house was built and placed in the, in the shade of the neem tree near the Duni, to keep the crowds away from the Jopti and the Jopti garden. It was more centrally located for people to gather. Baba continued there writing his book, especially from October 1925. And from that point, for 4 hours a day, generally from 8 in the morning to 12 noon, people were ordered not to come within 100 feet of that neem tree near the Duni. And by the way, we were talking about the expansion of the road through Mehrabad this year happening now. And the first thing we had to do was make sure that the egress for the road was shifted to the west so that that tree, the first tree that Baba sat beneath when he came to Mehrabad, Gilori Shah's tomb, and the Duni would be saved. So that has been accomplished, I believe. Baba then wrote the book. He was moving, it's interesting because he was moving to the west in increments of so many feet at that time writing the book. In March 1926, Sahavas had been built a few months before, and a cabin was constructed on the stage platform at the north end of Sahavas. Baba then began sitting in that cabin there and continued writing the book there. And occasionally he would sit in the middle of the night in the Hazrat Baba Jan school, also just near there, and write. And the last important place he wrote the book was up the hill in the West Room, in seclusion in May of 1926. But it's interesting that he gradually moved westward, finally up the hill, to do the writing of the book.
How long did that take? How long did that?
Well, Baba said in this explanation it took him a year. We're not sure when he stopped writing it, except that I can tell you that he finished writing the organized contents of description of that book after he returned to Mehrabad in the table house while it was in a different position from the original position. Why he did it then is because within a week he stopped writing completely, intensified his silence. And because of that, he explained that the depth and importance of the book that he had written will have an even much greater impact because he stopped writing immediately after finishing that.
Do you ever think it will come to light, this book?
Yeah,
At
when?
some point?
Well, whether it does or it doesn't, I see things a little differently. What is that? The avatar of the age takes on silence, fasting, sequestering himself in these little spaces and writing the secrets of the universe. This is more than information, as Baba himself clearly stated. A few years after he had written the book, one of the Mandalis said, Baba, why don't you just release your secret book and everybody will know and read it and then it'll all be over and it'll be simple. He said, what do you think they'll understand? What do you think they'll read and understand? They have not developed the capacity to understand. They don't have the ears to hear this yet. The real work, Baba said, is the preparation for them to be able to understand. And that's what Baba did by writing this book in silence and seclusion in these places around Mirabai, fasting, all that time.
So what you're saying is consciousness has to reach a certain point before the book is understandable.
It does.
So it won't be released until consciousness.
Absolutely, and that consciousness can only be a result of his work.
That's
We didn't get into the subject of manifestation, which we'll get to in one of the later talks, Sunday probably.
Baba said that in the nothing and the everything, he gave 10% of the book.
Bao said that.
Yes.
Is that what Baba said?
Baba said that.
Yeah. So
Bao said that, Baba said.
Bao said that Baba said. Others of mine
do you
were
think
there.
that is like a literal like section of the book, or do you mean it's like 10% of the kind of like impact?
I won't make that assumption. I think the nothing and the everything is an incredible piece of work. I can't make that assumption. According to what Baba has said in this simple statement about his book that we just read, there's more that we haven't seen. By other comments Baba has made also, there is more that we haven't seen. But whether this comes out or not, the real thing is that he has done the real work, which is more than writing a secret book. That's the thing to remember. The impact that it will have on consciousness of humanity in general, and for those who are specifically connected with him specially.
Wouldn't it be funny if you wrote the book but it got lost?
Well, he very cleverly created a convoluted trail in the final decade of his life. And the last time, Don himself was the person who went, after Baba had dropped the body, he was there and he brought up the subject to Erin. She said, maybe now's the time to release the book. Erin said, yes, could do it, but he said, where's the book? He said, well, I thought Elizabeth had the key. So he talked to Elizabeth. He said, have you got the key to the strong box in Bombay where the book was there? Oh, well, yes, no, Baba told me to give it to that wonderful gentleman. What's his name? Anyway.
Peter, that's a great place to stop, isn't it? For
We're
now,
going
I
to
hate doing this. It's like when Bauchi used to come and talk and talk and talk and talk.
Talk
This
and-
man could do this all night,
Yeah.
or tomorrow, or the next night, and the next day. And like this, which there will be more of this man. And I'm just going to ask people that want to